bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie tonight, 9 till 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's 9:30 on Monday the 8th of January. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Andrew Pearce, and Ellie Costello.
Post office payouts. Ministers have joined calls for the former post office boss Paula Venables to be stripped of her CBE. 1 million people have now signed the petition. Is it now just a matter of time?
Time to resign. Pressure growing on Lib Dem leader Sir Ed Davey to quit over his role in the post office scandal. The same Sir Ed Davey has called for public figures to quit 31 times since he took over the Lib Dems in April 2019.
Jeremy Corbyn is set to launch a new political movement to rivals Keir Starmer's Labour Party.
And remember the Gladiators? Well, they're back. The Hit 90s show is back on our screens next weekend, and we're going to be speaking to the Wolfman himself later this morning to preview the upcoming series. Doesn't look like that now.
No.
I'm also talking about Derek Draper, who died at the weekend, husband of Kate Garraway.
Your colleague.
Yeah, from Good Morning Britain. Known her for years and years. The longest, he had the most severe symptoms of COVID and the longest surviving. So heartbreak for her family.
Yeah, and she has released a statement this morning thanking people for their best wishes. We'll be reflecting that this morning. Before we get into any of that, let's get the news headlines with Sophia.
Thank you, Ellie. Good morning. It's 9:31. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. More than 1 million people have signed a petition demanding a former post office boss be stripped of her CBE. Paula Venables was in charge and routinely denied there were problems with the Horizon IT system, which made it look like money was missing from shops. Hundreds of staff were convicted, jailed, bankrupted, and some took their lives after they were wrongly accused of theft. The government is now looking into ways to exonerate those caught up in the scandal. One of the victims, Christopher Head, says he doesn't believe the fault lies with just one person.
The reason that Paula Vanel's is being singled out is because she was made aware on countless occasions of the problems. And obviously she was in the position at that particular time to do something about it and failed to do so. So I think that is why that's been the case. But, you roll back over the years that, there is obviously people in Fujitsu, there is people in government or ministers or even, civil servants that maybe try to have damage limitation, let's say, in order to try and make this a hope that it will go away. So there's countless number of people. So you had previous CEOs at Post Office of Adam Crozier. The list is endless. So we need the inquiry to finish so we get to the bottom of that, and obviously for the Met Police to do their investigation.
MPs will debate the offshore petroleum bill later as Parliament returns for the first time this year. If it passes, the legislation will mandate that licences for oil and gas projects in the North Sea are awarded annually. It's already led to the resignation of Tory MP Chris Skidmore, who says the law would show the UK is rowing ever further back from its climate commitments. Freezing conditions are set to hit the UK as some areas still try to recover from the floods. An amber cold health alert has been issued for parts of England, with sleet and snow forecast. The Met Office has also issued yellow warnings for ice, with the cold snap set to continue throughout the week. The door which blew off an Alaska Airlines plane mid-flight has been recovered. The Boeing 737 MAX 9 was forced to make an emergency landing after the drama unfolded in Portland on Friday. Investigators confirmed the key missing component was found in someone's garden. The Federal Aviation Administration says the fleet, including those operated by other carriers, will remain grounded until they're deemed safe. And the number one competitor to Elon Musk's SpaceX has launched a rocket heading for the moon.
Two GEM 63XL solid rocket boosters and twin BE-4 engines produce more than 1.7 million pounds of thrust.
The maiden flight of the Vulcan rocket lifted off from Florida this morning on a moon mission called Peregrine, which is expected to land on the 23rd of February. The Vulcan rocket is operated by the United Launch Alliance company. If it touches down safely, it will be the first American craft to make a soft landing on the lunar surface since the Apollo era. And you can get more on all those stories by visiting our website at gbnews.com. Now it's back to Andrew and Ellie.
Well, Kate Garraway is taking a leave of absence from her presenting roles following the death of her husband, Derek Draper, the former political advisor.
Yes, on Friday, the Good Morning Britain presenter announced that her husband had died after suffering long-lasting symptoms from COVID-19. And, Andrew, you are a colleague of Kate Garraway, aren't you? I mean, how is this news affected?
Well, I was there on Good Morning Britain with her this morning, and, of course, there were the tributes are pouring in, but I knew Derek Draper when he worked for the Labour Party. He worked for Peter Mandelson, who was a creator of New Labour. Bluntly, Derek Draper could be difficult, and I had many run-ins with him as he was an advisor. Some were good-humoured and good-natured, some weren't, but that's what goes in politics. But he was formidably clever and talented. He left, under a cloud, there was some scandal, I can barely remember what it was about, cash for access or something, but Kate Garraway tamed him.
Really?
And father had tamed him, and he retrained as a psychologist, and an incredibly difficult 3 years for her and the family, and I just hope, I was very struck by the statement she made this morning, that she and her kids can find some peace now.
How has it been watching her over the past 3 years? Because you've worked so closely with her, and people are so struck by her strength.
She's incredible. She's getting up at, 3 or 4 in the morning, as people do when they do the breakfast show, and you wouldn't know that she's then going home to 24/7 care. Derek was doubly incontinent. She'd done documentaries. She was also struggling with the cost of it all. Difficult for the children. The house had been completely physically modified to accommodate him because he was downstairs. Because he'd been in an induced coma for months and months and months, and it must have had a toll on his body.
Well, absolutely, it must have done. And it's so powerful, isn't it, how it has absolutely captured the nation. This story, their marriage, I mean, here she is.
She's getting her MBE. And why she only got a miserable MBE, I'd have given her something a bit stronger.
Well, maybe she will now.
Yeah, but also, if you remember, this is her coming out of the jungle in Australia, in ITV's I'm a Celebrity. She did brilliantly. She didn't win, but she did brilliantly. And she was to get her her own Saturday show on ITV, COVID struck, and he was one of the earliest victims. And I can remember as he was in the ambulance leaving the house saying, I wonder if it's the last time I see my children. Well, he probably never saw them quite in the same light.
Quite the same way again. And the children were so young, weren't they, when he first got ill? I don't know how old they are now. But I think for Kate Garraway, she's always been the nation's sweetheart, hasn't she? She's always been adored by so many. But I think people have seen her devotion to her husband and, as you say, how hard she's worked throughout the whole thing. I think there's a newfound respect for her on every level.
Sarah Binesworth, you've written about her in your column, haven't you, many times
I mean, I
in the
also
Mail?
knew Derek a little bit, a little tiny bit. I went out a few occasions for dinner with him. He was, he was a really good, fun person. I mean, very sharp. Very sharp as a box of tacks.
I've heard he's a huge personality. Really takes over the room.
Really kind of quite fighty, quite fun. It's such a shame. And I honestly take my hat off to her. I have no idea how she survived the last 3 years. I mean, and also she was saddled with a huge HMRC debt of £700,000 when she had to close Derek's business. And I do hope HMRC are being kind to her, because they can be quite unkind. Because she's had so much to deal with, and having to, take on that massive financial responsibility, because of course, he probably never expected this to happen to him.
No, absolutely. And I just hope that Kate Garraway has the support, not only financially but emotionally, that she needs, because as you say, Sarah, she's been so strong, but probably also because she's had to be. And now finally perhaps she'll have the time to actually reflect on everything that's happened in the past few years.
And of course I think what she really needs to do is just to rest and sleep. But actually she's got to go back to work.
But also I imagine that in her position it's probably quite difficult for her to rest and sleep, because she's probably so worried about the money and about everything else and the children and stuff. You can get to that stage, can't you, where it's just almost impossible to switch off.
Absolutely.
So she just needs to find some
And she looks
help.
amazing too. That's
she does.
Always looks extraordinary.
And she's beautiful as well.
She is.
Sarah, we'll come back to you
We're sending you lots
in just
of love,
a minute, and we are.
Kate Garraway and your family. Now, the Justice Secretary, Alex Chalk, is meeting with ministers to consider ways to help clear the names of those convicted sub-postmasters. Remember, 730 were pursued pitilessly by the Post Office in what's been described as the biggest miscarriage of justice in British history.
Well, more than 1 million people have now signed an online petition calling for Paula Venables, who led the Post Office when sub-postmasters were unfairly prosecuted, to now be stripped of the honour.
Victims of the Post Office scandal and MPs have also said Sir Ed Davey, the Lib Dem leader, had serious questions to answer as he was Post Office Minister in 2010 and 2012, and they're saying he should step down. Bear in mind, Davey, sanctimonious Sir Ed Davey, has called for public figures to step down no fewer than 31 times since he took over leader of the Lib Dems in April.
Thank you. Well, joining us now is Conservative Lord and former MP Lord Arbuthnot. Very good to see you this morning. Where do we begin with this story? Rishi Sunak and, of course, now the Justice Secretary, under huge pressure to bring justice, really, to all of those who were so wrongly convicted in this scandal.
Yes. The real concern that I have at the moment is that of the 730 or more, it could be up to 900, maybe 1,000 people who have convictions. It's astonishing, actually, that we don't know for sure how many there were. Only 93 have had those convictions overturned. And this is a mass problem. And the only way I think we're going to be able to overcome it is to have a mass solution. The process that we're going through at the moment of each person meticulously having to prove that their conviction was unsafe, that is not working. And so we've got to have a mass solution to this. And I'm delighted that Alex Chalk and Kevin Hollinrake are meeting to discuss that, and I hope that they can come up with an answer very quickly.
Lord Arbuthnot, you've been banging on about this tirelessly for some years. It's ironic, isn't it, that it's taken this extraordinary ITV drama, Mr Bates versus the Post Office, for it to actually capture the public imagination. Why do you think it's been so slow to do that? Bearing in mind, my own newspaper, the Daily Mail, has been campaigning on this for years as well.
Yes, the Daily Mail has done a very good job. Computer Weekly broke the story. Private Eye was fantastic, and the Times has been doing some things, and gradually people have been latching on to the story. But I'm delighted that at last it's hit the public imagination, and I don't care how, frankly. I'm not frustrated that it's a drama that has done this. I was frustrated that nothing was doing it for the years. I mean, I've been on this since 2009, and it was very difficult to get it into the media or to get politicians to take the interest that they should have taken.
What about Fujitsu? Because we will ask you about Paula Vanel's in the post office, but Fujitsu supplied this dodgy Horizon IT system. £150 million compensation has been paid out already. I don't think a single penny has come out of Fujitsu's coffers, and we note that they're getting more contracts, including from the post office.
Yes, they're getting those contracts from the post office because somebody, while the Horizon system is still being used by the post office, and I hope that won't be long, somebody has to maintain that program, and only Fujitsu knows the ins and outs of that program. So in a sense, the post office has no choice but to use them for that. Whether Fujitsu should be used for any other government contracts, I rather doubt, but they have kept an extraordinarily low profile over the years. My view is they have got to bear a large part of the cost of compensating these sub-postmasters and putting things right, because Fujitsu were the ones who were getting into sub-postmasters' accounts without their knowledge, altering those accounts, causing the problems, not keeping records of what they were doing, and denying that they could do it. And so they bear a large proportion of the blame for this, and they must bear a large proportion of the retribution as well.
And what do you think should happen with Paula Venables now? There are calls online, a petition garnered more than 1 million signatures now for her to be stripped of her CBE. Should she be stripped of it, or should she hand it back herself with an apology? I was talking to a sub-postmistress yesterday. I was asking her exactly the same question. She wanted her to be stripped of it. And she also said she wanted her pension to be used as compensation towards sub-postmasters and sub-postmistresses. Millions and millions of pounds Paula Venables has received in a pension.
I'm a little uneasy about going after just Paula Venables. She bears her share of the blame, and she must bear her share of the retribution. But there were so many people who behaved so really badly that I worry that if we go after Paula Venables as the front person to be got at, we may think that justice has been achieved once she has been punished as she needs to be. There are lots of people who bear the blame, and I am not concentrating myself on Paula Venables.
What about the people, the compensation order Arbuthnot? Why is it taking so long? Too few have been paid. Rishi Sunak says they're going to try and speed it up. This has been dragging on for, well, you've been involved since 2009. Why so long, bearing in mind some people took their own lives and some people have died of natural causes since this scandal first started unfolding?
Yes, we need to cut through it. Alexander cut through a Gordian knot. That's what we need to do here. The largest miscarriage of justice that there has come before the CCRC, the Criminal Complaints Review Commission, before this one was 10 cases. We're now looking at potentially 700, 900. It's out of all proportion to what we've seen before. So we've got to have legislation, I think, to make it simple, quick and easy. The sub-postmasters shouldn't be applying to have their convictions overturned. It ought to happen automatically. And then there needs to be a very simple process of assessing the compensation, rather than demanding that the sub-postmasters come up with paper after paper that may have been destroyed. After all, a lot of the evidence in this matter has been destroyed, some by the post office, some by the sub-postmasters themselves. And so we've got to have a much simpler process, much quicker.
Lord Arbuthnot, thank you very much for your time this morning. We really do appreciate it. Sarah Byrne is still with us in the studio. What do you make of this, Sarah?
Well, I think that Lord Arbuthnot makes a very good point that Fujitsu really do need to be persecuted now for this. Prosecuted, not persecuted, but because...
Well, I don't mind a bit of persecution as well, actually.
Because, you know, the British taxpayer will have to compensate people.
150 million already.
And Rishi Sunak is saying 600,000 per person who is, you know, found to not be guilty. They will all be found not to be guilty because it was a massive IT error. And, I mean, as you said, the Daily Mail has been on this for a long time. I think we first reported this in 2013. So I've been reading about it for a long time. And I think there is some evidence that Fujitsu sort of knew this thing didn't work before it actually went into use, that there were some problems with it, there were some flaws in it. So I think we really, I mean, I think the government do need to come after them. I think Ed Davey, who, I mean, calls for this woman to lose her CBE. I think that's the least she should do. She should give back her CBE. If I were her, I would say, I'm so sorry. I really didn't realise the depth of this, and I'm giving back my CBE. I'm not sure it's worth going after her pension. You know, will that solve any problems? Probably not. And you know, it may be that she, like as Arbuthnot said, she probably didn't quite know she was. I'm sure she was being advised, and I'm sure she took the advice she was given, and she probably took it in good faith, thinking that was right. And the same is probably true of Sir Ed Davey. He probably was advised that this was a matter for the Post Office. There wasn't anything that he could do about it. But the fact is that I think he has not said anything, and I think he does need to come out and say that, and say, look, I'm really sorry. I was advised that this was not a matter for my office, but I realise now that was wrong, and I am deeply sorry.
But minister's job is also often, isn't it, Sarah, to push back against civil servants who say no, minister, or yes, minister, to push back. Shouldn't it have occurred in his skull? Shouldn't a better light have been going on and thinking, hang on, these posts, 700 of them?
I know.
Cooked the books?
Yes. Also,
700 of them ripped off the taxpayer?
Also just out of nowhere, out of the blue, having never done anything like that before, and the coincidence of having introduced a computer system at the same time should have rung some alarm bells, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, you know...
And people going to jail and committing suicide, and he still kept pushing back and saying to Mr Bates, the famous Mr Bates as he is now, I don't want to meet you. No need to meet you. And Mr Bates Bates actually saying he was shocked by the gross rudeness of.
But I mean, he does need to address it because we are coming into a general election. He could potentially be a coalition partner for a Labour government. I'm sorry, but we need to have some proper answers about his involvement. I really do think
we do.
And what do you think should happen in terms of ministers meeting today? What would you like to see in terms of perhaps a mass solution?
Well, I just think that I think accepting that it was a computer disaster, that the mistakes, that the computer system was not fit for purpose, should mean that these people don't have to prove their innocence. That's the main thing. It was a faulty computer system. The errors were all to do with that. I think we should just have a blanket sort of amnesty, and they should all be given compensation and allowed to get on with their lives.
Now, you've upset Carol Vorderman.
Have I? Why?
She's attacked you on Twitter.
What have I done?
Because you defended Sean Bailey, the Conservative peer.
Did I?
Yeah, isn't that right? Have I got this right?
I don't remember doing that.
Yeah. Why she had to go, Sarah Byrne? We'll bring you up to date. Carol Vorderman, who is now, in my view, heading for the House of Lords.
But I haven't said anything about Sean Bailey.
Oh. Why has Carol Vorderman attacked...
We've got the tweet here.
It's almost as if I predicted the right-wing nonsense from Julie Hartley-Brewer and her fellow cauldron stirrer, Sarah Vine, see witches of Fleet Street.
Where? This is what she's tweeted, January the 5th. She goes on to say, Sarah Vine describes herself as a Wednesday witch on her bio. Here are her words. I'll await your apologies. I'm still waiting.
No. I'm sorry. I haven't said anything about Carol or about... Sean Bailey, please feel free to look at my Twitter feed.
Yeah. So she goes on, they aren't serious politicians at all. Most of this current Tory crowd are charlatans who've been to some dire Conservative stage school to learn the divisive communal grunts, as well as taking directions from Portcullis House to Dufton Street without the aid of geek or match. She's just attacking you for what you say in your column, really.
Oh, just for being me?
Yeah.
OK, well, that's fine. But I have to say, I do know Sean Bailey a little bit, and I don't think he's very sexist.
Well, he's
never said anything sexist to me.
No, so Carol Vorderman isn't happy with Sean Bailey because he said that she wants to be a serious political commentator, but then has her breasts out on Instagram. She couldn't be both.
She doesn't have her breasts out on Instagram, does she?
No.
I've never seen her breasts on Instagram.
So those are the comments that she's taking
Anyway, I
issue
have to
with
say,
him.
I don't. I mean, unless I am going completely mad or have early onset dementia, I don't remember saying anything about either Sean Bailey or Carol in the context of this argument.
But what do you think about her anyway? Were they right to BBC to get rid of her?
And also, by the way, I describe myself as a Wednesday witch on Twitter because that is an old Fleet Street term for the column that I write in the Daily Mail. They were always known as the Wednesday Witches, weren't they? That was the joke.
Because on Wednesday, most of the Fleet Street papers have a woman.
And it was always known as Wednesday Witch. So it's actually just an old Fleet Street term, and it's a bit of a joke. Just for clarity.
She hasn't got a lot of... She's got a great sense of humour, Carol Baldwin.
Well, maybe she just doesn't know the context, but the context is that that's what we used to be referred to as Wednesday Witches.
What do you think of the fact... have you caught up with the Wellingborough by-elections coming up? Peter Bone has been forced out, and for flashing, apparently, his researcher, they picked his girlfriend as the Tory candidate.
That's very strange.
Isn't that a bit odd?
It's a bit weird, yeah. But that's associations for you. I mean, they will have picked the person.
Yeah, I mean, the local Tory party it's their power, and they've chosen...
Tory party associations can be eccentric in this respect, I find. They do appoint quite strange candidates.
Because you'd want a fresh start,
you would
think,
You would
think so. Because Bone is standing down because it was a unanimous report by a Commons committee which found his behaviour involving... He'd bullied this researcher, then he'd flashed at his researcher and other things. So why would the Tory party then choose his live-in girlfriend? I mean, wouldn't they just want to say, we want to move on from that?
It's probably that he's got the support of the association. They probably think it's a witch hunt, so they've decided to support him.
Yeah, they think he shouldn't have been forced out.
Exactly, that would be what it is, I imagine. I don't know. I can't tell.
What do you think, Andrew?
Well, I think they're around the twist for choosing her. I think they should have gone for somebody completely different. It's a gift for the...
But, I mean, the problem with the Conservative Party has often been the associations, in that they do these sort of slightly eccentric things.
Well, they chose Liz Truss to be leader of the Tory party, which went down very well, didn't it?
So, you know, it's quite a sort of... it's a very strange voter base, the Tory Association, you know, the kind of Conservative grassroots party. They're not always their best advocates.
You would have known this Conservative Association rather well when you were married to Michael Gove, of course.
Which one is it?
His associate Conservative.
Oh, you mean Sarah Heath?
Yeah,
yes.
you'd have to.
They're all lovely, obviously.
Sarah Vine, thank you so much. Thank you.
She's so unusually diplomatic.
She is very good.
She's not very diplomatic, which is why we have her on. I mean, just before you go, do you remember Wolf? Do you remember Gladiator Wolf?
I never watched Gladiators.
Right.
I was never a fan of it. I think because I always felt physically inadequate myself.
Well, we are going to be catching up with him very soon.
He doesn't look like he used to, but then who does?
Who does?
Who does? That's coming up shortly on Britain's Newsroom.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, morning. I'm Marco Patagna. Here's your latest weather update from the Met Office. We'll see plenty of fine weather across the UK during the week ahead, although cloud will start to increase from the north later, and temperatures will also start to recover after a chilly start. Back to the detail for this morning, though, and we've got quite icy conditions down towards the southeast. A warning in force across parts of southeast England until 10 o'clock this morning. Do take care out and about on the roads, with wintry showers moving in from the east. One or two showers up across parts of eastern Northern Ireland there as well, but elsewhere across the UK it's set fair. Fog and frost soon lifting to give plenty of sunshine, and those showers across the southeast migrate their way westwards as we go through the day across other southern counties of England, turning increasingly to rain as temperatures start to pick up, although it will be a chilly day, and that takes us into quite a chilly evening too. Those showers continue their way westwards into southwest England as we go through into the evening, but elsewhere a lot of dry weather around and turning frosty as we go through the evening under clear skies. So a pretty chilly start as we get into the early hours of Tuesday. Temperatures widely dipping down to, if not just below, freezing. And again, a few fog patches in place as we go into the Tuesday morning itself. Through the day on Tuesday, the fog and frost will generally lift fairly readily. Plenty of sunshine around, but again, it will be staying quite cold, even though it's early January. Temperatures no better than 4 or 5 degrees during the afternoon. 5 Celsius is 41 in Fahrenheit, and that's several degrees below where they should be for the time of year. So certainly wrap up warm over the next few days. The cold weather is here, set to stay for a few days at least.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Good morning, it's 10 a.m. on Monday the 8th of January. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and me, Ellie Costello.
The Post Office payout. The Justice Secretary Alex Chalk is meeting ministers today over the Horizon scandal. Our political reporter Olivia Utley, she's got more.
Ministers are discussing ways to overturn wrongful convictions and to speed up the snail's pace compensation process. But no option is that straightforward. You'll find out more with me just after 10 o'clock.
Time to resign. Pressure is growing on the Lib Dem leader Sir Ed Davey to resign over his role in the Post Office scandal. Sir Ed Davey, who himself was called for public figures to resign 31 times since he was leading the party.
And the tube strikes in London over pay have been called off at the 11th hour, but there's still much disruption because of the last-minute cancellation.
And the Gladiators are back. The hit 90s show's back on our screens next weekend, and we'll have the Wolfman on later this morning to preview the upcoming series. But we're asking, is this revamp really a good use of BBC money?
Our money, of course, because we paid for the flipping BBC
Yeah.
through the licence fee. Also talking, of course, about the death of Derek Draper, married to the... she's a bit of a national treasure.
She is.
Kate Garraway from
your
Good Morning
colleague.
Britain. Yep, known her for years, worked with her for years. She's been overwhelmed with literally tens of thousands of messages of support and affection after Derek finally passed away through complications caused by COVID.
Yes, so we're going to be reflecting that in the programme. But before we get into any of that, let's get the news headlines with Sophia.
Thank you, Ellie. Good morning. It's 1 minute past 10. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. More than 1 million people have signed a petition demanding a former post office boss be stripped of her CBE. Paula Venables was in charge and routinely denied there were problems with the Horizon IT system, which made it look like money was missing from shops. Hundreds of staff were convicted, jailed, bankrupted, and some took their lives after they were wrongly accused of theft. The government is now looking at ways to exonerate those who were caught up in the scandal, with the Justice Secretary and Post Office Minister meeting today. One of the victims, Christopher Head, says he doesn't believe the fault lies just with one person.
The reason that Paula Venables is being singled out is because she was made aware on countless occasions of the problems. And obviously she was in the position at that particular time to do something about it and failed to do so. So I think that is why that's been the case. But, you roll back over the years that, there is obviously people in Fujitsu. There is people in government or ministers or even, civil servants that maybe try to have damage limitation, let's say, in order to try and make this a hope that it will go away. So there's countless number of people. So you had previous CEOs at Post Office of Adam Crozier. The list is endless. So we need the inquiry to finish so we get to the bottom of that, and obviously for the Met Police to do their investigation.
Economic Secretary to the Treasury, Bim Afalami, says the government is working as quickly as it can to compensate the victims.
It's worth saying that everybody involved with the Post Office Horizon scandal, 100% of them have received interim payments of over £168,000. That isn't enough, that's an interim payment. We've brought forward a bill going through Parliament, should clear Parliament in the next week or so that we don't have to wait for the results of the inquiry, so that we can get this compensation paid in full as soon as possible. In addition to that, the Lord Chancellor, who's head of the justice system, is meeting with other colleagues across government later today to see how much faster we can make sure they have the legal redress as well as the financial redress. We want to get this sorted as soon as we possibly can.
Freezing conditions are set to hit the UK, with some areas still trying to recover from the floods. An amber cold health alert has been issued for parts of England with sleet and snow forecast. The Met Office has also issued yellow warnings for ice, with the cold snaps set to continue throughout the week. More than 160 flood warnings remain in place across the country, and over 1,800 properties have been damaged. After being criticised for not meeting with flood victims, the Prime Minister spoke to the affected residents in Oxford yesterday. Rishi Sunak tried to defend his record, saying the government has invested £5.2 billion in flood defences. Labour has accused the government of being asleep at the wheel over flood warnings. Sir Keir Starmer is visiting the flood-hit East Midlands today. MPs will debate the offshore petroleum bill later as Parliament returns for the first time this year. If it passes, the legislation will mandate that licences for oil and gas projects in the North Sea are awarded annually. It's already led to the resignation of Tory MP Chris Skidmore, who says the law would show the UK is rowing ever further back from its climate commitments. The door, which blew off an Alaska Airlines plane mid-flight, has been recovered. The Boeing 737 MAX 9 was forced to make an emergency landing after the drama unfolded in Portland on Friday. Investigators confirmed the key missing component was found in someone's garden. The Federal Aviation Administration says the fleet, including those operated by other carriers, will remain grounded until they're deemed safe. The US has launched its first moon mission since the Apollo era. The maiden flight of the Vulcan rocket lifted off from Florida this morning on moon mission called Peregrine, which is expected to land on the 23rd of February. The Vulcan rocket is operated by the United Launch Alliance company and is the #1 competitor to Elon Musk's SpaceX. If it touches down safely, it will be the first American craft to make a soft landing on the lunar surface since the Apollo era. This is GB News across the UK, on TV, in your car, on your digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's back to Andrew and Ellie.
Welcome back to Britain's Newsroom. The time is 6 minutes past 10. Thank you so much for your company this morning. Lots of you emailing in, aren't they, this morning?
Certainly are. A lot of people very angry about Ed Davey, the Lib Dem leader. Phil says, when will he own up to his incompetence as Post Office Minister? He failed to deal with complaints about Post Office managers, which led to widespread injustice. He's not fit for public office, and the Lib Dems should disown him until there's an inquiry into his incompetence.
Beverly says, not sure if this is Bev Turner, but Beverly says every victim of this Post Office scandal should be invited to the palace. They should be given an apology and a pardon, and then a very big fat cheque and a promise that every person who cruelly lied and destroyed so many lives are brought to justice and exposed to the public for who they truly are. There is a lot of public anger about this,
really
rightly
is.
so.
And of course, it's the TV programme Mr Bates versus the Post Office which has brought it very sharply into focus. Well, we're going to talk now to the Labour MP Kevan Jones, who's been on this campaign for absolutely years and years. But first, we're going to talk to Olivia Utley, who can give us an update. Olivia.
Hello, yes, and hi, Andrew. So obviously the problem with this ongoing story is that there are still a lot of postmasters who have wrongful convictions. There were 700 convictions altogether. About 100 of those have now been overturned. The rest of those people are still waiting to see those presumably wrongful convictions, to see themselves exonerated. Now, Rishi Sunak has said that he is looking at ways to speed up the process, to get those people exonerated and to get them the compensation they deserve. There are basically two options that they could consider to do this. One would be to strip the Post Office of its role in the appeals process. There's sort of almost archaic legislation which says that the Post Office can do its own prosecution process, and this is how all of these sub-postmasters were put through the courts. Now, they are also involved, the Post Office, in the appeals process, and lots of postmasters say that is the reason that the process has been so slow. The other option would be simply to exonerate all of the postmasters in one go, which is something that the Justice Secretary Alex Chalk is looking at very carefully. There are problems with both options. Obviously, moving the process out of the hands of the Post Office and into the hands of the prosecution service, the Crown Prosecution Service, would mean a lot of extra resources and would have a knock-on impact on other cases. And of course, exonerating almost 700 people in one go would be a pretty unprecedented move. But those are the sort of radical options that ministers are having to look at now, having let this scandal get so far.
All right, that's Olivia Utley in our Westminster studio. Joining us now is the Labour MP for North Durham, Kevan Jones. Kevan Jones has been on this case for many, many years and has now today highlighted another extraordinary thread to this scandal, that a pilot scheme was rolled out in 95 and 96, a full 3 years before this scheme came online, in which staff were prosecuted because of a glitch in the system. Kevan Jones, it seems... Good morning to you. 95 and 96, the writing was on the wall even then, and yet the Post Office persevered with this scheme. Fujitsu carried on. What does this say to you?
Well, it's what I've come to expect over the years from the Post Office. It's been lies and cover-ups all along. But the key point is we've got to get these convictions overturned because they're quite clearly unsafe.
But if there was problems with the pilot back in 95 and 96... is there any evidence that they were then able to fix it before it was rolled out properly in 1999? Or do you think they just kicked it into the long grass? Because at least 2 Post Office staff were prosecuted over it.
No, it was the usual. The computer is always right. And the unique situation is the Post Office had was the ability to prosecute people themselves. And also the contract that the Post Office postmasters had meant that they had to pay any shortfalls back. And that seemed to be then arrogantly used by the Post Office just to cover up their own mistakes.
Kevan, you're a long-standing campaigner on this issue. Does it frustrate you that it's taken an ITV drama to bring this issue to the fore? I mean, we're talking about compensation moving at a snail's pace. Does it frustrate you that it's taken an ITV drama to actually get ministers around the table and the pressure on them to move quickly on this, to act?
No, I think the drama was very good because it put the victims at the centre of it, which I think is the right thing to do. myself and James have both not been at this for many years, and it's have we had ups and downs over the years? Yes, we have. But the real issue that this would not have come to anywhere without Alan Bates and the campaigners who took the court case, which then discovered all the documentation which we knew was there, that they were lying.
Of course, he was dismissed rather haughtily, wasn't he, Mr. Bates, Alan Bates, by the Post Office Minister at the time, Ed Davey, Post Office Minister between 2010 and 2012, now the Lib Dem leader, a man who we see today has called no less than 31 times for people in public life, Kevin, to stand down or resign or be sacked since 2019. He doesn't seem to practice what he preaches.
Well, no, but he's just one of a succession of, I've got to say, useless Post Office ministers we've had that James and I have dealt with over the years. Credit to him, the one that really changed this was Paul Scully, who, when he became Post Office Minister, did really make sure he got some answers and got change. But before that, frankly, no, they just believed what the civil servants told them. The worst one I think I ever experienced in a Westminster Hall debate was Joe Swinson.
Kevin, what do you make of Fujitsu's role in all of this? Of course, the company behind the Horizon IT scandal, they're managing to keep a very low profile in all of this. Not only keeping a low profile, but they're also receiving many public sector contracts.
Well, they shouldn't. And what they've got to do is explain their position and take responsibility. I don't think the government should give them any new contracts until they've fully explain their role in this and take some responsibility.
Can you explain also why, we've talked about the snail's pace compensation payout, why is it taking so long, Kevin? And why have only 93 postmistresses had their convictions overturned when there were over 730 prosecuted?
Because the system relies on those people coming forward, and if you've met many of the victims, which I have over the years, they're completely traumatised with this process. They're not going to go anywhere near a court of law, but it's fact that's come out both at the inquiry and also the court case that these Horizon convictions are unsafe.
And Paula Venables, who led the Post Office when said postmasters were wrongfully prosecuted, over 1 million people have now signed a petition asking for her to be stripped of her CBE. What do you think? Should she lose her CBE or should she hand it back herself?
Well, I've been calling this for the last few years, including writing to the Fortitudes Committee. But the irony is she was actually given it in 2019 when all this was known for service at the Post Office. So it says something about the way these honours are actually handed out in the first place. But if she had any decency, I think she would give it back herself.
All right, that's Kevan Jones. Always good to talk to you, Kevin. He's the Labour MP for North Durham who's been fighting this fight on behalf of the postmasters and postmistresses for a very long time.
This leads us on nicely, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. To Piers Pottinger, of course, has advised governments and institutions, and because, Piers, I can remember you and I talking when you were advising the Post Office Union, which was fighting against the privatisation of the Post Office. And you won that campaign.
We did, and that was when Alan Johnson, later to become a minister,
former postman, of course,
and he started off life as a postman, and then went on to lead the Union of Communication Workers. And yes, we worked for them then. I mean, what's happening now is a massive disgrace. Everyone acknowledges this is the greatest miscarriage of justice in British history. If you acknowledge that, you need to sort it out quickly and properly without hesitation. Now, for Ed Davey, it's interesting. It wasn't just Ed Davey. His boss was Vince Cable. He was then followed by Norman Lamb and Joe Swinson, who the Labour MP there mentioned. I mean, they're all Lib Dems. And as you say, Andrew, Ed Davey specialises in calling for people to resign. He's hidden behind a party spokesman over this. We have yet to see him personally apologise, take the blame for being misled, as he claims he was, but he was responsible. He was the Minister for Postal Affairs. And if I was in the Lib Dems, God forbid, I would be very worried at having him as a leader. Coming up to an election year.
This is not going to go away, is it? This is going to
I don't see how anyone can vote Lib Dem with Ed Davey as the leader.
What about his defence that he was misled by the Post Office? Perhaps he's got to show us who misled him. Because my argument would be, look, hang on, Minister, you're told facts by the post of your advisors. He should use his own brain and work out, hang on, where did 730 postmasters and postmistresses suddenly come from, who were all breaking the law, all got their hand in the till? Yeah. It's unheard of that so many would behave that way so quickly and so suddenly.
And in the same way.
Yeah.
I mean, it is, of course, it should have rung very big alarm bells. It clearly did with the management of the Post Office. They knew something was wrong. That's the shocking aspect of this scandal, one of the many shocking aspects. But of course he should have looked into it when he was being written very, very good letters by Alan Bates. On many occasions. He met Alan Bates once, I believe. But, I mean, it should have rung alarm bells. It didn't. He didn't follow it up. He has not apologised. He should, instead of calling for other people to resign from their jobs, what he should be doing is leading the charge to sort this out and get the compensation to put all the people whose lives were ruined by this. He should be trying to put that right, and he's not. He's not doing anything.
About the fact he took £275,000 when he was on the back, because he lost his seat for a couple of years, and then when he was back on the back as in Parliament, from the legal firm, the law firm hired by the Post Office to fight back against the postmaster's compensation claim. He took £275,000.
I mean, that is disgraceful, and that alone...
He didn't know they were working for the Post Office.
I can't believe that. I find that very hard to believe. It's a lot of money, and he shouldn't have taken that money, particularly knowing what he did then. And I can't see how he can remain as Lib Dem leader with this going on. I mean, he's hiding behind party spokesman. He's not coming out and doing what he should do if he really cared about it. Being a Lib Dem, you'd think he'd care about the ordinary person a little bit, but he doesn't seem to.
And what about Paula Venables and her role in all of this, leading the Post Office when these postmasters were
I think, obviously, the management... No, we weren't advising her.
But if you were...
If I was advising her now, I think she should hand it back and say, I'm very sorry. Quite frankly, it's an honour, but honours these days have been rather devalued. And actually, the people I'd be really going after is Fujitsu. I mean, they've got 200 government contracts at the moment worth £6.5 billion, and they're of taxpayers' money. We're still paying this company, and have we heard any apology from them?
Very,
of course, Japanese companies, the worst thing you can do in a Japanese corporation is lose face. So for them to admit it was their fault and their problem and their system, and I believe their computer system is still being used in other places, God forbid.
What would your advice to Fujitsu be then? Because they have managed to keep a very low profile through all of this.
Well, I think they're terrified of a massive lawsuit, and they're going to hold out until the last minute. Personally, if I was them, I would be looking at a fund for damage limitation and looking at helping to pay the compensation to the 730 people who deserve it. And after all, why should it come from the taxpayer? It should come from Fujitsu.
And some of the postal staff who have been compensated, because a lot of that money has been eaten up in legal fees.
Of course it has, yes. And I mean, some of it, the compensation was hardly made up for their loss of their life, their bankruptcy, their humiliation, going to prison. In some cases, people took their own lives. This is the biggest scandal in British justice, and it deserves the biggest response. And we're not getting that at the moment.
Do you think Rishi Sunak, we heard him speaking over the weekend, do you think he understands the great feeling on this issue, the anger that British people feel on this?
I think he does.
Because when he's talking about we're looking into this and we're reviewing this, Alex Chalk will be looking into this on Monday morning, is that the rhetoric, the level of rhetoric that people want to be hearing?
He is looking into it. I mean, as far as I know, he was having a meeting this morning on this very subject. But he's a measured man, he's a thoughtful man, and of course the last thing he can do is make promises he can't deliver. Yet again, we've got the civil service and the legal system up against the government. It'd be wonderful if he could wave a magic wand and say, here you are, everyone gets £1 million and the prosecutions are all cancelled. It would be wonderful. Unfortunately, he can't do it. And in a democracy and with a strong legal system, it's hard to allow any individual that power. Although I think the will of Parliament would be to do exactly that.
In 30 seconds, the tube strike was called off with 20 minutes before it was due to start yesterday. Where did the Mayor of London find the money? Down the back of a sofa?
Well, at the weekend. I wonder where he found it suddenly. It looks to me and smells to me like a publicity stunt by Sadiq Khan in an election year, and a very unpopular Mayor of London trying to sort something out. Don't forget, in his manifesto, he promised no strikes on the tube, and during his reign so far, we've had 130.
Amazing.
Wow.
Which is, there were 35 when Boris was mayor in 8 years.
There you are.
130. Extraordinary. Piers
Pottinger.
Always a joy to see you.
Thank you very much indeed.
He always tells it as
Pleasure.
it is.
Now, still to come, what did the wolf say after eating Miss Piggy?
Oh dear, that he was Gladiator.
Yes.
Who wrote this? We know who it is. Somebody called Callum.
Yes, this is Britain's Newsroom on GB News. It will all make sense after this.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
(10:26) with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Ellie Costello.
Now, the iconic 90s game show Gladiators is set to return to our screens this Saturday after a lengthy layoff.
At its prime, often known as the king of Saturday night TV, Gladiators pulled in viewing figures of 16 million and had stars like, remember them? Wolf, Rhino, Jet and Lightning.
Well, Mike Van Wyck, also known as The Wolf, joins us now. Very good to see you this morning, Mike. So what do you make of this? One of the biggest shows of the 90s. What do you make of this reboot?
I think it's fantastic. You know, I think it's going to be a lot harder for them this time around because of Netflix and Prime, and they've got a lot of competition, whereas before we didn't have all that.
You were probably the biggest TV star in Britain in the 90s, Mike. What was it like? You were recognised everywhere.
Yeah, it's surprising. I couldn't go anywhere. I couldn't even go to a shopping mall. I'd be mobbed.
And do people still stop you now? I mean, it's such an iconic game show, isn't it? People absolutely loved it. Did you realise at the time how big it was going to be?
No, I never envisaged it's going to be that big. You just don't realise, you know, the power of television.
Why was it so successful, Mike?
I think basically it was a family show. I mean, Grandma could sit down with the children and their children, and it was just the whole family show. There weren't really family shows out at the time, and it captured the market.
And you were the wolf, weren't you, in Gladiators? You became the bad guy in the show. Whose idea was that?
It was my idea, but because when they said to me, your name's going to be Wolf, that they chose the names. We had no say in that. And I thought Big Bad Wolf. And, you know, it was fantastic for me because the character was so strong. It kept me on the show for the whole 8 years.
And what advice would you give? And what advice would you give to the new Gladiators starting this weekend?
I would say create your own character. Don't try and copy anybody else. Just be yourself, and that will come across to the audience far better if you're yourself rather than trying to copy somebody else.
And if you had your time all over again, Mike, would you do it again?
Oh, absolutely, 100%. I really enjoyed doing it, and to be perfectly honest with you, all joking aside, I could do it right now.
Really?
I'm 71 years old. I'm 71 years old. I'm fit. I'm strong. I've never stopped training. Be walking the park.
Maybe they should have asked you.
I wish they would. I don't think they'd get the insurance to cover me.
Yeah. So have you been asked to help in any way? Because I'm sure you'd be a great mentor for some of these new gladiators.
To be perfectly honest with you, I wanted to take part in some shape or form in the new series, or even be a co-host. But when I contacted them, got no reply. I think they basically wanted to get away from everything to do with the original show and just do it their own way, which is understandable.
No, the only reason people are going to tune in is because of your show.
I think they've missed a trick there, Mike. They've missed a trick. Do you think it will still have the same magic, this new series, as your series did? Do you think it will be anywhere near as successful?
I hope it does for the Gladiators because, you know, it's a big challenge for them. But as I said before, they've got a lot of competition out there. And social media wasn't around. Wish it was when we did it. And it's a pretty tough trying to get an audience when there's so much, like as I said, Prime and Netflix and so many other shows to compete against you. We kind of had a monopoly back in the day. All we had was Noel Edmonds up against us.
Oh, Mr. Blobby, who cares about him? Mike, great to talk to you again. Happy New Year. That's Mike Van Wyck, who was Wolf. We've still got Piers Pottinger with us, who's the great PR strategist and advisor. Is this really a good use of BBC money to repeat a programme which wasn't theirs? It was an ITV programme.
I don't know. I mean,
format.
it baffles me because the BBC are cutting back in news, they're cutting back in drama, they're cutting back in the arts, they're cutting back in overseas correspondence and the World Service.
I mean, the ITV thing about the post office is ITV.
I hate to think how expensive this show is going to be, and for a publicly funded broadcaster to embark on just simply rebooting an old idea for very, very light entertainment. I'm sad to say I never watched the original series. It never did anything for me as an idea, but I think I question the wisdom of the BBC doing this while they're cutting back on everything else. And also, as a publicly funded broadcaster, they don't need to rely on ratings or viewers as commercial broadcasters do. And therefore, I can't see the justification for spending, which will be millions, on a programme that is, quite frankly, old hat.
It shows they've got no ideas of their own.
It does. And I mean, very rarely do revamped old ideas work. Every time people try it out, I mean, I think of some of my favourite films, like The Italian Job was remade, and it was dreadful. It really was. They remade Alfie. It was dreadful. When people... It also seems to me that they don't seem to have any new ideas. No. They should be thinking of new ideas rather than regurgitating old ideas from another broadcaster, costing millions. Sorry, BBC get the big thumbs down from me on this.
OK.
I agree with you.
Piers Pottinger, thank you very much indeed. You will have a view on that at home. Is a reboot of the Gladiators a waste of the BBC licence fee? Do let us know, gbnews@gbnews.com. But do stay with us. Still to come, the Tories' secret weapon. Jeremy Corbyn has been tipped to decide in just a few weeks whether to launch a new political movement to rival Sir Keir Starmer's Labour Party.
Corbyn really is a true Conservative hero. He's won the more elections than anyone.
That and much more after your morning news with Sophia.
Thanks, Ellie. It's 10:33. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. More than 1 million people have signed a petition demanding a former post office boss be stripped of her CBE. Paula Venables was in charge and routinely denied there were problems with the Horizon IT system, which made it look like money was missing from shops. Hundreds of staff were convicted, jailed, bankrupted, and some took their lives after they were wrongly accused of theft. The government is now looking at ways to exonerate those who got caught up in the scandal, with the Justice Secretary and Post Office Minister meeting today. Freezing conditions are set to hit the UK, with some areas still trying to recover from floods. An amber cold health alert has been issued for parts of England, with sleet and snow forecast. The Met Office has also issued yellow warnings for ice, with the cold snap set to continue throughout the week. And more than 160 flood warnings remain in place across the country, and over 1,800 properties have been damaged. After meeting with flooding victims in Oxford yesterday, Rishi Sunak tried to defend his record, saying the government has invested £5.2 billion in flood defences. Labour has accused the government of being asleep at the wheel over flood warnings. MPs will debate the offshore petroleum bill later as Parliament returns for the first time this year. If it passes, the legislation will mandate that licences for oil and gas projects in the North Sea are awarded annually. It's already led to the resignation of Tory MP Chris Skidmore, who says the law would show the UK is rowing ever further back from its climate commitments. And you can get more on all those stories by visiting our website at gbnews.com.
For stunning gold and silver coins you'll always value, Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
And here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2695 and €1.1606. The price of gold is £1,597.70 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,664 points.
Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Thanks, Sophia. Still to come, Oppenheimer was the big winner at the Golden Globes last night, taking home 5 awards, including the top prize. Stephanie Tecci will be here with all of the news and the gossip from the night. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
10:39 with Britain's News on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Ellie Costello.
Now, it was no surprise to many that Oppenheimer was a big winner at the Golden Globes Awards last night, taking home 5 awards, including the top prize.
But some eyebrows were raised by the comedian and host Joe Coy, one of the worst hosts I've ever seen or heard of, by the way, who took a silly swipe at the roars. Let's have a listen.
But you got more? You're clapping like 9, really? Just a great series about a rich, white, dysfunctional family, all scheming. Oh, no, that's The Crown. That's The Crown. I'm sorry. How great was Imelda Staunton in The Crown?
Ooh, well, let's speak now to showbiz reporter Stephanie Tecci. Andrew isn't impressed. Stephanie, before we get into the awards, because there is lots of good news from last night, let's talk about the controversial host, shall we say, Joe Coy, some calling him the worst host ever.
And I agree, Ellie. I think sometimes, when you get these hosts for these big award shows, I understand they're under so much pressure to impress a worldwide audience. But sometimes they push that controversial too far in terms of taking swipes at people. And people just found him very distasteful. He made fun of the Royals last night. He made fun of Taylor Swift. And, the judge, he's been really hung out to dry. And I don't think he will be ever presenting the Golden Globes again. I think, usually most people say he's quite funny. His material is quite funny. And that's the whole reason why he was picked in the first place. But last night, I don't know if it was the pressure. I don't know if it was the nervousness. But, this is the first Golden Globes that they've had on TV in the first 2 years. And to be honest, he's just taken all the headlines, but for the wrong reasons.
He just wasn't very funny, Stephanie.
No, it was just, I know our British humour is quite different, but from the time the Americans didn't find it too funny, that says something. I think he was just trying too hard, and I just think he's left a bitter taste for the Golden Globes. All eyes were on the Golden Globes, Andrew. They've had a lot of controversy over the past few years, and this was their year to really make a comeback. And unfortunately, they just picked the wrong host for it. They should have stuck to someone like Ricky Gervais, who would have got the job done.
Yeah, I think a lot of people wanted to see Ricky Gervais last night. It's not the first time I've heard that. So perhaps not a good night for Joe Coy, but it was a great night for Oppenheimer.
Yes, it was. 5 awards, including Best Director and Best Actor for Cillian Murphy. I'm not surprised, Ellie, because during the summer, it was between Oppenheimer and Barbie, the two massive box office bestsellers, box office, that people really came to watch. So, when it comes to award seasons, they tend not to give comedies. Barbie was up for 8 awards, but it was Oppenheimer that people picked. It was a 3-hour stellar look at the making of the atomic bomb. It made over £1 billion in the cinema. So, this is just a sign to come of what we're going to see at the Oscars and at the BAFTA Awards.
It was a bit... Look, a great film, Steffi. The one thing that worries me about these films, they go on so blimmin' long now. It was 3 hours, for God's sake. We didn't need 3 hours.
I found it so boring, if I'm honest, but you know what? I cannot knock Christopher Nolan. When it comes to cinematography and when it comes to directing, he is almost the best at what he does in Hollywood. So in that sense, he will receive all the accolades in Hollywood this award season. But I think, of course, most people were surprised that Barbie didn't pick up more awards. But it did pick up Best Cinema and Box Office Achievement. It was the highest grossed film of 2023. So who knows, maybe in the Oscars and the BAFTAs, it might be Barbie's moment.
Why don't you think Barbie did any better last night? Andrew thinks it's too woke.
I think it's a bit of that, Andrew, but also when it comes to award seasons, when it comes to like action films, when it comes to like comedy films, for some reason it doesn't really connect with the members, even though they do well in the cinemas and it gets the bums on seats. When it comes to award season, they always tend to go for the more hard-hitting stuff. They want to go for the stuff that, in a way, I hate saying this, but it's a bit more credible. There's a bit more story to the plots. And so I think that's why Barbie won't maybe have a good season this award season.
OK, Stephanie Tecci, always really good to see you. And matching us in blue, thank you very much indeed.
I didn't like Barbie either.
No, I know you didn't, so you'll be quite pleased they didn't do very well last night.
I'm the resident grump this morning.
But we still love you.
Thank you.
It's all right. We're also joined by writer and journalist Emma Wolfe and the former Labour advisor Matthew Lars. They're on our panel this morning. Very good to see you both. And before we dive into the stories that you've got for us this morning, I wanted to share with you this picture that's been making headlines today. It's Sir Keir Starmer in goal. Safe pair of hands, do you think, Matthew?
What is he thinking of, Matthew Lars?
Yes, I'm glad I wasn't. I mean, when I worked for Band, I was brought in to be. My job description was basically make sure he never eats another bacon sandwich anywhere near a camera. I think I'd be giving some advice to make sure that back here's outfit choices. Somebody will their heads will be rolling this morning.
But the headlines: call yourself a safe pair of hands. Yes. He's a 6-year-old bloke trying to show he's still young.
It's a bit harsh, Andrew. He's genuinely. I mean, what I find distasteful about politics now is where every politician has to pretend to be a football fan, even if they're not.
Yeah. Tony Blair was in past.
Yeah, exactly. Remember, Tony Blair got into trouble for an anecdote and he got the player who was in the wrong decade or something.
Well, I think the stand he watched it from wasn't even built.
Exactly.
It was at Newcastle
You wouldn't get that with Keir, because Keir is genuinely... I'm not, but Keir genuinely is a football fan.
He's
so
not
a bit harsh on him, but he needs to, he needs to be a little bit careful now. He's number 10 is hopefully just around the corner.
Not very good at football, though, is he? Dodgy goalkeeping performance. On Sunday, where these pictures are taken, his side faced a 14-8 defeat.
Crikey.
Ouch.
Yeah, I mean, that is one of the things you don't want to be... You don't want to be losing in the year of an election. You don't want to be losing even an amateur football match.
All right, well, let's stick to the Labour Party, shall we, Matthew? Jeremy Corbyn thinking, at least, about launching a rival Labour Party to split the left.
Absolutely. So, I mean, Jeremy Corbyn's been trying to sort of hinting that he's going to stand for London Mayor, but that was as an independent. He started a little organisation, a sort of, already, but it's not a political party. So now, sources close to Jeremy Corbyn
which would be Jeremy Corbyn.
Which would be Jeremy Corbyn. I'll indicate it. Oh, you're on fire today, Andrew. You really are. It's being tipped to launch an actual political party that would take on Labour at the polls, not just for the London Mayor, but in seats across the country. And particularly, the aim is to capitalise on discontent amongst the left and amongst Muslim voters, the anger there has been amongst those groups with Keir's stance on Israel-Gaza. So that's what he sees as an opportunity.
Now, I wrote a different version of this a few months ago in the Mail, that in Tower Hamlets, which is the heart of London's East End, it is run by pretty much a Muslim party called Aspire, run by a man called Luther Rahman. Yeah. They turf Labour out.
Absolutely.
The local Labour MP there has refused to support a ceasefire in Gaza. She's stuck to her front bench job while a lot of others have resigned. And there's talk that he could put candidates up. What if he joined forces with Jeremy Corbyn?
So I think that's quite likely. So this is a very interesting seat because this is the seat where Una King was the MP in the Blair Revolution of '97, and then she lost her seat after the Iraq War in 2005 to George Galloway, who has his own Workers' Party. He was on GBNews on Saturday afternoon, so Galloway would be hoping that he would be the recipient of that Muslim anger about Gaza. But I think Jeremy is much more likely to team up with Luther Rahman in Tower Hamlets. Interestingly, there's been a story about them today. The Palestinian flag is flying all over Tower Hamlets, both legally and illegally, and so a group of lawyers are now trying to take Tower Hamlets and the sort of left Muslim group who run it, as you say, to court because there are rules around flags.
It is. We were cycling through Tower Hamlets yesterday, which is near to me in Hackney, and the flags were everywhere. It's not often I support Jeremy Corbyn, but I think this is an excellent idea. I think he should absolutely split the left if this is what his plan is. The Tories are already really quite worried about reform.
Why this weekend in particular are so many Palestinian flags flying? Is there anything in particular?
I have no idea. Matthew, do you know why?
There was another demonstration on Saturday. There was a die-in, as they called it, where I live in Westminster Bridge, and they was blocked by hundreds of people, lying on the ground pretending to be dead to highlight what they see as the atrocities going on.
But I remember I saw a Labour person quoted saying, "Oh, it won't make any impact if they rally behind a Muslim banner." That is ridiculous. There are some constituencies where the Muslim vote is 41, 42%. That is where this party would put up candidates, and they would take the votes from only one party, Labour.
They would take the votes from Labour, but they would only split the Labour vote, wouldn't they? They're not going to actually take on... I mean, we would end up at the general... Jeremy Corbyn's left this quite late if he's going to launch an actual party.
And he needs some money.
Before... Yeah, exactly. He needs money. He needs... I think we have to be not too London-centric, though, because there are areas of the country where this would not even make any impact at all.
Sure.
So I think what would happen is we would end up splitting the vote really across the board, on the left and on the right, with Reform and the Tories and everybody going for all these smaller and smaller bits of pie.
I mean, Keir will be... I mean, in some ways, I think you're right. I think there will be an actual electoral challenge in seats where either there's a Muslim majority or the majority of Labour voters are Muslims. So which we saw because George Galloway later on stood in Bradford in a by-election and won. So I think that would be Labour's fear in those very Muslim areas. In other areas, do you remember when Arthur Scargill, who was the voice of the left back in the 80s and early 90s, where he set up a party to stand against Tony Blair, who he thought was too right-wing, and that got humiliated. But that didn't have the advantage of being, associated with this particular Muslim cause.
He was a discredited old fraud. Not least, we discovered that...
Jeremy Corbyn's not a fraud, but he's discredited.
But Scargill spent his entire life opposing everything Mrs Thatcher did, and we then discovered he put in an application under Right to Buy his council
absolutely. Lions led by donkeys, the miners in the strike, as one of the other trade union leaders said. But one thing, of course, is a lot in terms of the internal Labour story here. There's been a lot of people on the left or Corbynistas have already left. If any of them go and support this party, it's just like with Militant, they'll be taking pictures and they'll be out of the Labour Party too. So that would be an advantage for Keir, but obviously there's some downsides.
Yeah.
Emma, we've got time for one more story, so let's take a look at Prince Andrew, shall we? He's refusing to move out, apparently.
Yeah, and he's been refusing to move out for a while. He's been saying he absolutely needs and belongs in Royal Lodge in Windsor. 10 bedrooms, 30 rooms. He's living there with his ex-wife. I mean, you know, really, he's living there with his ex-wife, Sarah Ferguson. With the latest release of the Epstein papers, there's nothing specifically new in them, apart from bits and bobs that we know that he visited Epstein a lot. We now know that he received
suggested he took part in an underage orgy.
Suggestions, but we haven't had anything yet. We haven't had the smoking gun yet, with daily massages from female staff, all of this. The pressure is now growing on, well, obviously on Andrew. The court of public opinion have made up their mind about Andrew, but I think the pressure is now really growing on the King to do something. He is living in Royal Lodge at the taxpayers' behest, basically. He's got security there. You know, is this really a fit man? It's a real thorn in Charles's side, this difficult, troublesome younger brother. It's only going to get worse. He doesn't, you know, you saw that confrontation with the public the other day with Andrew saying, why are you filming me? And he's obviously not in a mood. He's angry, he's belligerent, he's humiliated. He's settled already with Virginia Giuffre.
For a woman he says he doesn't think he even met, £12 million.
Exactly. I mean, that was a multi-million
pound... It's an expensive non-meeting, isn't
it? It's an expensive... I don't know this woman
It's important to say Prince Andrew obviously vehemently denies any wrongdoing.
But
of course...
On Royal Lodge, I went to interview him for the first time when I was on the Telegraph, and I went to Royal Lodge in Windsor, so I thought it would be a lodge, quite small. I couldn't believe it was like a stately home. And as I was waiting for him, whirring sound, a flipping helicopter landed in the garden, which gives you an indication of the scale of those. It's
30 rooms, isn't it?
And when we say 30 rooms, we don't mean rooms of our sizes. We mean
absolutely.
All rooms,
Well, I think the King, now the King's indicated that he's going to withdraw the security and be pretty firm with Andrew. He's going to have to follow through with it, isn't he? He can't...
Well, it's not going away, is it?
Yes, absolutely.
And there's
what do you do with him?
There's a very nice estate in Scotland called Balmoral. It's a long way from the road. It's obscured from public view by lots of
I know many council flats all around London that he could pop him in. You know.
But there's plenty of cottages on there. He could go and live on the Balmoral estate. He could be the gamekeeper. He could look after the estate.
Gives him to shoot, yes, absolutely. Yeah, no, I think that's the ideal solution.
And he'd do us all a favour and take Fergie with him.
Absolutely, and I think thus far it hasn't damaged Charles yet, but I think, as you say, it's not going away, and I think the King is going to have to do something about this.
There's more documents coming, aren't they? Well, Matthew, Emma, thank you very much indeed.
Now, 1,800 homes have been left underwater as the chaos continues with the weather. How do we tackle this?
Yeah, we're going to be talking about that in the next hour. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. A cold start to a cold week. Most of us will be dry through this week, but today we do have a few showers around. High pressure is controlling our weather, as it will do for the next several days. And around the high pressure, the winds go clockwise. I mean, we've got this easterly breeze across the south, and that is bringing a mixture of rain, sleet and snow showers over parts of East Anglia and the southeast. Increasingly, a few flurries likely in and around London, Essex, Kent, but also perhaps into parts of Hampshire, the Sussexes, and maybe one or two even in the South Midlands. The odd rain and sleet shower over northern England, southern Scotland, but for most it's dry. Quite cloudy, but where we've got some sunshine, well, it still feels cold because temperatures are struggling below average, and that wind making it feel even colder in the south, blowing a few more of those wintry showers across parts of the southwest, perhaps for a time through the evening and overnight, maybe into parts of South Wales. So again, you might see a few flurries here and there. Could turn icy as well, where we've got those showers as temperatures tumble. Again, widely well below freezing, particularly in Scotland, where there's some freezing fog patches which are likely to linger through the day, through the night and into tomorrow morning. Again, most places having a fine, bright day tomorrow. Any early showers in the southwest, they will disappear. If anything, not as much cloud around tomorrow, so a better chance of seeing longer spells of sunshine, but it ain't going to warm things up very much another cold one tomorrow.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Thanks, Alex. Still to come, fobbed off. That's how the victim of the post office scandal rightly feel when miscarriages of justice came across the then Postal Affairs Minister's Ed Davies' desk. He was Britain's Newsroom on GB News. Stay with us.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Carson, this Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show, every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
11 a.m. on Monday, the 8th of January. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Andrew Pearce, and Ellie Costello.
Post Office payout. The Justice Secretary, Alex Chalk, is meeting ministers today over the Horizon scandal. We'll have the latest.
Is it time to resign? Pressure growing on Lib Dem leader Sir Ed Davey over his role in the Post Office scandal. He was Post Office Minister when it was all happening.
Icy weather warning. Britain is braced for a freeze with snow on the way. The Met Office has issued a yellow weather warning today. And Barton, backlash. He's been tweeting quite controversial comments. We'll have the latest.
Is that sexist football manager?
It's quite a sexist rant, some would say.
I think women are qualified to do football commentary.
Yeah, and suggesting in his latest rant that some women at least, have slept their way to the top or slept their way into jobs as football commentators. What do you make of that? GBviews at gbnews.com. Before we get into any of that, though, let's get the latest news headlines with Sophia.
Thanks, Ellie. Good morning. It's 1 minute past 11. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. More than 1 million people have signed a petition demanding a former post office boss be stripped of her CBE. Paula Venables was in charge and routinely denied there were problems with the Horizon IT system, which made it look like money was missing from shops. Hundreds of staff were convicted, jailed, bankrupted, and some took their lives after they were wrongly accused of theft. The government is now looking at ways to exonerate those who were caught up in the scandal, with the Justice Secretary and Post Office Minister meeting today. One of the victims, Christopher Head, says he doesn't believe the fault lies just with one person.
The reason that Paula Venables has been singled out is because she was made aware on countless occasions of the problems. And obviously she was in the position at that particular time to do something about it and failed to do so. So I think that is why that's been the case. But, you roll back over the years that, there is obviously people in Fujitsu. There is people in government or ministers or even, civil servants that maybe try to have damage limitation, let's say, in order to try and make this a hope that it will go away. So there's countless number of people. So you had previous CEOs at Post Office of Adam Crozier. The list is endless. So we need the inquiry to finish so we get to the bottom of that, and obviously for the Met Police to do their investigation.
Economic Secretary to the Treasury, Birma Falami, says the government is working as quickly as it can to compensate the victims.
It's worth saying that everybody involved with the Post Office Horizon scandal, 100% of them have received interim payments of over £168,000. That isn't enough, that's an interim payment. We've brought forward a bill going through Parliament, should clear Parliament in the next week or so that we don't have to wait for the results of the inquiry, so that we can get this compensation paid in full as soon as possible. In addition to that, the Lord Chancellor, who's head of the justice system, is meeting with other colleagues across government later today to see how much faster we can make sure they have the legal redress as well as the financial redress. We want to get this sorted as soon as we possibly can.
Freezing conditions are set to hit the UK, with some areas still trying to recover from floods. An amber cold health alert has been issued for parts of England with sleet and snow forecast. The Met Office has also issued yellow warnings for ice, with the cold snap set to continue throughout the week. More than 160 flood warnings remain in place across the country, and over 1,800 properties have been damaged. After being criticised for not meeting with flooding victims, the Prime Minister spoke to affected residents in Oxford yesterday. Rishi Sunak tried to defend his record, saying the government has invested £5.2 billion in flood defences. Labour has accused the government of being asleep at the wheel over flood warnings. Sir Keir Starmer is visiting the flood-hit East Midlands today. MPs will debate the offshore petroleum bill later as Parliament returns for the first time this year. If it passes, the legislation will mandate that licences for oil and gas projects in the North Sea are awarded annually. It's already led to the resignation of Tory MP Chris Skidmore, who says the law would show the UK is rowing further back from its climate commitments. The door which blew off an Alaska Airlines plane mid-flight has been recovered. The Boeing 737 MAX 9 was forced to make an emergency landing after the drama unfolded in Portland on Friday. Investigators confirmed the key missing component was found in someone's garden. The Federal Aviation Administration says the fleet, including those operated by other carriers, will remain grounded until they're deemed safe. The US has launched its first moon mission since Apollo. The Peregrine Mission 1, built by US space company Astrobotic, will become the first private probe to land on the lunar surface. The rocket lifted off from Florida this morning and is expected to land on the 23rd of February. It's operated by the United Launch Alliance company, the #1 competitor to Elon Musk's SpaceX. If it touches down safely, it will be the first American craft to make a soft landing on the lunar surface since the Apollo era. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on your digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's back to Andrew and Ellie.
Thanks, Spear. The time is 5 minutes past 11. Thank you so much for your company this morning. Loads of you emailing in. Lots actually on Derek Draper, the late husband now of Kate Garraway, one of your colleagues. Ian says, please can you send my condolences to Kate? I too lost my partner just before Christmas. Jean had 5 years of liver cancer. So sorry to hear that, Ian. She had pain but was stoic and was able to smile and make jokes. In the end, she went quickly and that pain is gone. Well, we're sending our condolences to you as well, Ian. Thank you very much for your email. And Bill says, my wife is in bed 24/7, very ill. I'm her carer. Kate and their story helped show how difficult it is to get help when you're very ill. She inspired me, so it's touched a lot of people very similar to us.
And a lot of people are getting in contact about Gladiators.
Yes.
So most people think good bringing it back because they say it was fun and it gets young people in. But I love this from John, who says, I do hope they do a celebrity version of Gladiator where Gary Lineker is battered by the top gladiator, throwing sticks or something.
Yes,
What's wrong with Gary Lineker, apart from his views, which we seem to pay for?
Well, yes. Yeah, lots of people saying it's actually a fantastic idea to reboot Gladiators on the BBC. Ian says it was a fantastic show, but Wolf should have been a presenter. And Gemma says she loved it as a kid, really looking forward to it being back. And Leo makes a good point, actually. The reason why they're bringing it back, Leo says, is an attempt to appeal to young voters and therefore, justify the licence fee.
Rules me out, then.
You loved it, did you, back in the day?
I didn't.
No,
actually.
OK.
I thought it was dreadful.
It was a good interview with Wolf earlier, wasn't it?
Yeah, he was great.
He was very good.
Great to see him back, and he looks pretty good, minus the hair.
He's carried on working out at 71, he said.
And he looked pretty damn good for 71.
He did, yes.
Now, ministers are meeting today to consider measures into clearing the names of hundreds of sub-postmasters convicted in the Post Office Horizon scandal.
Well, joining us now is Chair of the Justice Select Committee and Conservative MP for Bromley and Chislehurst, Sir Bob Neal. Very good to see you this morning, Sir Bob. So for these sub-postmasters and sub-postmistresses, they'll be screaming at the television saying, finally, it's only taken an ITV drama, but finally, justice could finally be served.
Well, we certainly want to get this moving. In fairness, when I spoke to the Justice Secretary, Alex Chalk, he'd already started on work on this prior to the TV. Very, very moving, fantastic piece of television, wasn't it? Prior to the series coming out when the issues were raised with him. But you're right, this has come out over a period of time. The scale of it has grown. We now know a lot more about the scale of this horrific problem, and so now we need to get moving quickly on it.
Bob, a lot of people are talking about the government has already coughed up £150 million in compensation. Why has Fujitsu, who provided this defective IT equipment, not, it appears, paid a penny, and more so also, they've said nothing either?
It may be, Andrew, that's partly because we've still got the public inquiry ongoing. Like you, I think at the end of the day, we ought to be looking to Fujitsu for recompense for these poor people. As I understand it, the government's made this money available on an interim basis, and I think you're right. We ought to be looking very carefully about any future dealings we have with Fujitsu, shouldn't we, after this? And I think at the end of the day, if this is due to their failure, and individuals have gone through terrible things, and the government is out of pocket by paying them rightly compensation, I'm entirely with you about we should be pursuing them.
And what about Paula Venables? As this woman knows shame, Sir Bob, it's not just that she got a CBE, but the citation for that CBE in 2019 was for services to the Post Office. So by any stretch of the imagination, this is one of the worst miscarriages of justice in modern British legal history. And she was in charge during much of this time.
Well, I'm inclined to say, Andrew, that's initially between her and her conscience, but I think a lot of people will feel exactly as you've expressed on that, and I think it's an interesting contrast, isn't it, between her and Mr. Bates, who actually refused to accept an honour, despite actually the fantastic work that he had done. I think there's a moral judgment there, isn't it? Contrast and compare. But again, I suspect once we've had the full inquiry, so I suppose she has to have an element of due process. You'll know there are means of dealing with these situations where honours are brought into question. Then I'd be surprised if that wasn't looked at, put it that way.
So, Bob, what has taken so long? We're talking about something that's been going on for at least 25 years. Some of our guests this morning suggesting it could be going on for closer to 30. We know that the Justice Secretary is meeting the Minister of the Post Office today. They're talking about reviewing options and looking at it. That's as much as we've got in terms of Rishi Sunak talking over the weekend. But it is time for action, is it not? Something like a mass solution, exonerating anybody who was wrongly convicted and clearing all of those names. And then we've got compensation, of course, to think about.
Sure. Well, that's one of the areas I've been particularly concerned about, because the scale of this problem has emerged over a period of time, as you know, and clearly it's gathered pace, and that's just as well, thank heavens. But I think what we've got to do is to move swiftly now to do two things. Firstly, you want to get the compensation paid out on an interim basis and then full compensation as soon as possible. Secondly, these people do want their names cleared. They've been through a dreadful failure of our system. The way we have to do that, mind, is to have to balance getting swift justice for them and exoneration, and at the same time protecting the independence of the court system. Because what happened was, of course, they were convicted by the courts on, probably in good faith, what was the evidence presented to the courts at the time, but we now know that evidence was flawed, and so those convictions now need to be overturned. I rather agree with David Davis, my friend and colleague, who was on a different channel, but never mind, making the point that quite a lot of the people who he's spoken to, who actually had been victims of this, had said, we're really wanting not an exoneration by Parliament, or by some sort of pardon, but we actually want the convictions overturned by the courts because we were convicted by the courts. So what we need to have to look at is a means of moving swiftly to progress that. Two things I'd suggest we could do. One is that the Crown Prosecution Service should take over the conduct of the appeals. They're able to do that. 1985 piece of legislation, the Prosecution of Offences Act, enables them to take those over. What I then urge is that the government makes some money, needn't be massive, available to the CPS to bring in extra lawyers to review all the cases very quickly. And then at the same time, we must have a conversation with the judiciary, because the courts are independent, of course, and they will need to be able to list those cases. And it's worth bearing in mind the Court of Appeal, which would have to hear them, is running at full stretch already. There's a statutory limit on the number of High Court judges. Therefore, we've got a limit on the number of judges who's available. And what we don't want is a situation where other cases, which are already in the pipeline to be heard by the Court of Appeal, are pushed back because of this. I'm sure with imagination, and that's where Alex Chalk, the Lord Chancellor, needs to be speaking to Baroness Carr, the Lady Chief Justice, about how we make that available. But with goodwill and a bit of investment, I think that can be done, and we should be looking at months rather than the risk of it dragging on for years, as sometimes these things can be. That would be, I think, a fair way forward, which preserves the constitutional proprieties. But the other thing I think we've got to do, and this is something where I think the media can help us, there's an awful lot of the people who were victims of this, who were prosecuted, haven't come forward yet, either to claim compensation or to lodge appeals. Some of them, it seems, have been so traumatised by the process that they just want to walk away completely, even though they'd be entitled to significant sums of money. So I think we need to help all of us in encouraging them to have the confidence to come forward, to contact solicitors, and then their cases can be put, I hope, to the CPS, because they will be looking at it independently from the Post Office, whose lawyers clearly failed lamentably in this. And then the thing could hopefully be moved forward swiftly.
All right, that's Bob Neal, who is the chairman of the Commons Justice Select Committee, and he's the Tory MP for Bromley and Chislehurst. With us in the studio now, delighted, a regular guest here, Sean Bailey, Lord Bailey. What about the Lib Dem leader? Look, we've seen it's on the front page of the Times today. They've added it up. 31 times since he became Lib Dem leader in April 2019, he's called for people in public life to stand down. No ifs, no buts, get and go. This was the man who was Post Office Minister for 2 years. The evidence was building up big time. There was a serious problem here, but he was dismissive. In particular, he was dismissive of Alan Bates, who was, of course, the focus of this tremendous TV drama, Mr. Bates versus the Post Office. He says he was given the wrong advice or the wrong information by the Post Office. As Minister, he should have pushed back against it, shouldn't he?
I mean, first and foremost, this is the biggest miscarriage of justice in British history, and it makes horrific reading. The television show involved just brings it to life in such a way. And when you read it, some people have died since they were accused.
Some committed suicide.
I read a particularly harrowing story where a lady said if she wasn't pregnant, she would have committed suicide. And what that does, that gives the people the weight of what was going on here. It wasn't just someone said, you know, you stole a couple of quid from the tuck shop. This ruined people's lives and their families' lives as well. So when you look at the minister involved, the Lib Dem leader, what he'll have to look at, he's been a great opposition politician, hasn't he? He's loved telling people they should leave their jobs. What he'll have to realise now is it one rule for them and a different rule for him, because his mismanagement of a situation has been a life and death situation. So therefore, most people say, well, we shouldn't be even having a conversation. If you think people should leave their jobs for what, in comparison, would be a minor infraction, off you go. And hopefully he's learnt a lesson here, that he shouldn't be pointing fingers and causing eruptions when actually he's got a lot to answer himself.
Well, Sir Ed Davey hasn't said anything yet, but I imagine he would say he was going off the advice that he had at the time and the evidence that he had at the time from Horizon. Would that be enough for him to literally come out and put his hands up and say, look, I was just being ill-advised?
There's two things you've said that are important there. One is about putting your hands up. If you heard what Bob Neal was saying, the families involved want proper exoneration, and one of the people who needs to apologise would certainly be Ed Davey. The other piece is as well, I wonder if Ed Davies asked for ministers to go who could give the same defence as well.
Yeah.
Now, and that's the issue, isn't it? You could always say that a minister was given poor advice, and that could well be true, but should the minister carry the can or not? Now, that's for other people to answer, but Ed Davey would have to be part of that conversation.
And what about Paula Venables in all of this? Should she be stripped of her CBE?
Look, stripping Paula Venables of her CBE will not help anybody come back. It will not help any of these families feel any better.
Well, a million people think it will do.
Of course, because we now live in a culture of revenge and putting people out of their jobs and all the rest of that, hence the Ed Davey conversation. If that's what people want, I'm sure it'll rumble on. But I think what she ought to do is really reflect on how she's going to apologise, because she was part of this situation growing. Because what's incredible about this situation, the Post Office, at least according to the defence, the legal defence team, constantly ran a campaign of sort of misinformation, and they had hundreds of millions of pounds of lawyers leaning on these small working class people who are just trying to work for a living. That's the part that she was responsible for, and that's what she needs to reflect if and when she does agree to apologise. But she should also face those people who've had their lives utterly ruined by this.
What is the latest, whilst we've got you, Lord Bailey, on your spat with Carol Vorderman? We've got to ask you.
You better put it in context. How did you upset her?
Let's explain this situation.
So it's a bit of a crass way of expressing myself, but I express that she regularly attacks people and you know,
Tories. That's why she lost her job on the BBC.
Yeah, and then I just put myself in the firing line. But the bottom line is this: it's been, for me, it's not a spat. You know, if you're in public life like I am, you get attacked. You have to make a decision. Do you join in and amplify? I just think people should be a little less finger pointing, and people should actually look at what's the context.
Let's
of what
challenge
I said.
you on what you said, Lord Bailey. On the one hand, she's a serious political commentator. And then if you look at her Instagram, it's all pictures of her bum and her boobs. What is it? She can't be both. She says that's sexist and misogynist.
The point I was trying to make is she has absolutely savaged people. She has said some really terrible things about people. In fact, mainly women, actually. Said some really terrible things about women. And yes, I expressed myself in a poor way, but what I was trying to say is she lives in a glitzy, glamour world. Now, our children follow her, look up to her. She's a clever, intelligent woman. But on the other hand, she's deliberately trying to destroy people and organising massive pilings. The amount of racial abuse that I've had because of her, people threatening to kill my mum, all kinds of things, and that's directly because of actions she's taken. And the disappointing thing is people who should know better in places in the media have supported her in that. I had a woman approach me this morning and say, do I feel under pressure racially? I said, why? And then she took out her phone and showed me something that people had said to me on the back of Carol Vorderman's comments. Now, that is something that now I'm going to have to worry about. My mother's going to have to worry about. And the point is, if you're going to have political discourse, have it. But if you're going to attack people and organise pilings, you probably shouldn't be supported in that way. And all I'm saying is, if you have a massive platform, over 1 million followers, some responsibility comes with that.
When you say an organised piling, what you think she's deliberately got people to attack you?
This is not my opinion, this is the broad opinion. I've had other broadcasters say it to me. I've had people in the street say it to me. And she's written things about, look at him here, just ever suggested I don't get paid for the work, I shouldn't get paid for the work I do, etc., etc. This is worrying people. And now I'm having people stop me in the street and ask me, is there elements of race in this? Why are you singled out? I had another woman talk about what she did to Johnny Mercer. It's unnecessary. If you don't like the Tories, don't like the Tories, but to organise personal pilings like this, they run the risk. And the problem we have in this country now, we are polarised in a way we've never been, and this kind of activity is why.
Are you shocked then by the way in which this has snowballed, or in what you just said there, or does it not surprise you at all? This is the world that we're living in.
Unfortunately, I'm not particularly surprised, because recent history has demonstrated this. I was a bit taken aback at how everything was taken out of context. I admit it was a crass way of expressing an important point, but it's the way in which the world unfortunately works. And I think we're getting to the point where, as a nation, certainly the press, certainly the written press, will have to address this problem, because it isn't just me. There'll be people on the other side of the argument, so what, you're a Tory, been a Lord, stuff for you, whatever. But there's other people, like I have female Labour colleagues who now won't use social media because they've had rape threats, etc., etc. And this is the downside of organising these kind of pilings.
It is often a sewer, isn't it? Before we let you go, you were, of course, Tory London mayoral candidate 4 years ago. The tube strike, which would have been crippling for this great capital city, was called off at the 11th hour. Keir's Sadiq Khan said when he ran to be mayor in 2016 there'd be no strikes. I think there's been 130, 140 days of strikes, nearly 3 times as many strikes as there were when Ken Livingstone and Boris combined were mayor.
Look, there's a few things to say. Firstly, Sadiq Khan's trouble has been he's very close to the unions, they fund the Labour Party, etc., etc. So he's never really particularly wanted to stand up to them. And, of course, the people who have suffered are Londoners. And that needs to change. The other pieces as well. Has he actually resolved this? Because he's promised... It looks like he'll give them more money.
Well, it's suspended it.
Where's that money coming from?
Yeah, exactly. Where's that money come from? Because
ULEZ, expansion of the ultra emission zone.
It means Londoners will pay. And actually, has he just suspended it until after the election? Because we're in an election year now.
We are.
Is this a cynical ploy to make sure that they don't bully him until the election's gone? And the other thing as well, if the RMT get paid more, so if they are successful, what will he do with the unions that he said this is the last...
That's right.
He settled up earlier with a different set of unions.
They'll be back.
Yeah, they'll be back. And why wouldn't they be back when he's given this lot more money? The ultimate thing is, if he wants to protect Londoners, he needs to use minimum service rules. Now, I don't disagree that people should be paid a fair wage for
Well, they have to provide a certain level of service if you're an essential service like the tube.
Particularly because in London, we are super dependent on public transport. If you can't get public transport into work, London stops.
Does.
Hospitals, schools, etc., etc. So actually, he should instate that early on and let everybody know.
OK, Lord Bailey, thank you very much indeed.
You're very welcome to come on this programme or any programme on GB News. You'll be very welcome. We'll give you the number if you don't know where to find us.
Yes. Now, still to come, this is a bit of a viewpoint turn, isn't it? Why did the fish cross the road?
Because Britain's streets are flooded. Oh, dear.
Yeah, I don't know who's writing these this morning.
Whoever wrote that, hang your head in shame. We're going to be asking the meteorologist Jim Dale, who we know is very popular with GB News viewers and listeners, the answer to that question.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
It's 11:27 with Britain's Newsroom and GB News with Andrew Pearce and Ellie Costello.
Yes, now flooding chaos has seen more than 1,800 homes in Britain left underwater, and it could continue for another 5 days.
Can we expect more of the same for 2024? Well, joining us in the studio is the senior meteorologist Jim Dale, who, by the way, just handed me this. This is his first book. It's called Whether or Not. Quite a clever head.
Yeah. It's a clue to why the weather and the climate are so important to us. Within that book, there's all the reasons and rhymes why that is the case, and including the economy, including retail, including health and welfare, well-being. So it's all in there.
And I mean, we could talk about, your point is we're going to get more of this bad weather this year because of climate change, and you think it should be the #1 issue at the general election. I guarantee it won't be.
You might be right in terms of your second thing there. I think it should be. And the reason is it dictates everything else. So if we talk about what might be, the cost of living, for example, the NHS, these are normally the top things that you see in an election. The economy. Look, weather dictates. Weather dictates, believe it. I mean, let's just take the floods, for example. Vegetables rotting in the fields. What's going to happen to, say, potato, carrot, turnip, beet prices in the next few weeks? You'll probably see them going up. A year ago...
Because they're literally in flooded
soil. So demand and supply suggests that the prices will go up because there won't be enough of them to supply the supermarkets. Now, we had a snowstorm in Morocco a year ago, and if you remember, the shelves of vegetables, the fruit and veg, partly anyway, from Morocco, the shelves in the supermarkets emptied, and that was just a bit of snow in Morocco. So look, you might not think it. I think sometimes we take the weather for granted, the weather and climate, and until it hits us, and we keep getting hit, and we will, to answer your question, continue to be it. Why? Because emissions are still at a very high rate. They're not necessarily going down, and it's going to take many years for the climate to catch up on terms of the renewables that's going on now. One bit of good news is 2023 was the first time first time in recorded UK history that renewables overtook fossil fuels as our main energy source, 53%, and that the 30-odd% for fossil fuel was the lowest that we've seen on record. So you can see there's a trend going on, and that will not be reversed.
But it's not realistic, is it? Because Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, saying in that speech, which nearly sent, well, it virtually did send me to sleep. If I hadn't been working, I would have gone fast.
I watched the speech. Yeah.
So
I was
boring.
fine with it, but anyway.
But he's insisting we can have clean power by 2030. No need to rely on gas. That's for the birds. It can't happen in 6 years.
No, we have to have. We have to have the aim. There has to be a political party that will take us that way. Let's be frank about it.
But he chops and changes every week.
Well, not necessarily. He's promised 28 billion. Yeah.
But is it? I think it was going to be every year. Now it's going to be the second half of the
think he's got.
Which part of the second half?
He's got to be careful, and I don't think it's something you can say on the 1st of January 2030 everything's going to be the end of 2030 everything's going to be fine. I don't think that will be the case. But you've got to have an aim. As a politician, you've got to put something out there that says this is my sense of direction, the way I wish to travel. That's what he's done, in complete contrast to, for example, Reform Party, who are in some ditch somewhere thinking that the moon is made of cheese and
they're not here to defend themselves.
No, I recognise that, but obviously they're not net zero, and that's basically
they
yes, they're completely rejecting it. So this is why it's such a big issue come the election, and Mr. Sunak is sitting on a fence, getting splinters, two-faced. We'll have a Rosebank vote tonight that I'm sure he'll be voting for.
It's about renewing oil licences.
That's right. So you can't say I'm following net zero and at the same time vote essentially against it. That's not the way, which is why he's going to be laughed out of time come the election. Okay. One of the reasons.
Jim Dale, we're out of time, I'm afraid, but thank you very much for your time.
Plug, whether or not.
OK. Well, still to come, boy band tour. That's what the COVID inquiry has been compared to as it travels around Britain, costing the taxpayer £200,000 a day. That and much more after your morning news with Sophia.
Thank you, Ellie. It's 11:32. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. More than 1 million people have signed a petition demanding for the post office boss to be stripped of her CBE. Paula Venables was in charge and routinely denied there were problems with the Horizon IT system, which made it look like money was missing from shops. Hundreds of staff were convicted, jailed, bankrupted, and some took their lives after they were wrongly accused of theft. The government is now looking at ways to exonerate those who were caught up in the scandal, with the Justice Secretary and Post Office Minister meeting today. Meanwhile, Virgin boss Richard Branson has gifted a Necker Island holiday to one of the post office victims, Alan Bates. Freezing conditions are set to hit the UK, with some areas still trying to recover from floods. An amber cold health alert has been issued for parts of England, with sleet and snow forecast. The Met Office has also issued yellow warnings for ice, with the cold snap set to continue throughout the week. More than 160 flood warnings remain in place across the country, and over 1,800 properties have been damaged. After meeting with flooding victims in Oxford yesterday, Rishi Sunak tried to defend his record, saying the government had invested £5.2 billion in flood defences. Labour has accused the government of being asleep at the wheel over flood warnings. MPs will debate the offshore petroleum bill later as Parliament returns for the first time this year. If it passes, the legislation will mandate that licences for oil and gas projects in the North Sea are awarded annually. It's already led to the resignation of Tory MP Chris Skidmore, who says the law would show the UK is rowing back ever further in its climate commitments. And you can get more on all those stories by visiting our website at gbnews.com.
For exclusive, limited edition and rare gold coins that are always newsworthy, Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
And here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2711 and €1.1610 euros. And the price of gold is £1,593.83 per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,663 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Still to come, the Commons leader Penny Mordaunt is calling for a memorial to the Royal Navy's contribution to ending the slave trade. Let's see if she gets that sword out again.
This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show, every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
.38, you're with Britain's Newsroom with GB News with Andrew Pearce and the lovely Ellie Costello.
Oh, thanks, Andrew. You're lovely too. Now, ministers are meeting to consider measures into clearing the names of hundreds of sub-postmasters and mistresses convicted in the Post Office Horizon scandal.
Well, GB News political correspondent Olivia Utley joins us now. Olivia, this is an issue the Prime Minister clearly wants to get sorted. He's seen how outraged, frankly, people are now they've tuned into this extraordinary ITV drama, Mr Bates versus the Post Office.
Well, absolutely. The public is outraged. 1 million people have now signed a petition to get Paula Venables, who was the CEO of the Post Office between 2012 and 2019, stripped of her CBE. That just shows the scale of public fury at this scandal. 700 postmasters were given wrongful criminal convictions. 93 have now been overturned. But obviously, the remaining 607 and their families are furious about what they see as a drawn-out, snail's pace process to get them cleared. Now, Alex Chalk, the Justice Secretary, is considering various different measures to speed up this process. One option, which David Davis, the Conservative MP, has called for, is to have a mass clearing of all of those criminal convictions, so just see them all overturned at the same time. David Davis argues that in these circumstances, that option, which is pretty much unprecedented, would be justifiable because all of those convictions were based on the single idea that the postmasters couldn't access, the postmasters' accounts couldn't be remotely accessed. It turns out that they could be remotely accessed, and so David Davis argues that all of those convictions are now unsafe and should be immediately overturned. That's one option. Another option would be to take the Post Office out of the appeals process. At the moment, the Post Office can act as a prosecutor, and that is what it did in those 700 cases. It is also part of the appeals process, and postmasters argue that's why the process has all been so slow. And actually, 54 appeals have been rejected, and the convictions have been upheld, or else people have had to bow out at the last minute because the process has been so difficult and time-consuming. So one option is to take the Post Office out of the process altogether and put the Crown Prosecution Service in its place. That's a bit more laborious than simply clearing all the convictions as a whole, because obviously the Crown Prosecution Service has lots of other cases on its hands. But those are the sort of measures that ministers are now considering, really, really radical measures to get this process sped up as quickly as possible. And there are plenty of MPs out there, some of whom were speaking out very loudly for the postmasters during this crisis, who say that it shouldn't have had to get to an ITV drama before the government took this seriously.
Yeah, I think many people would agree with that. Olivia Utley there for us in Westminster. And we're joined again by Emma Wolfe, the writer and journalist, and Matthew Larser, the former Labour advisor, on our panel this morning. Good to see you both. What do you make of all of this? Do you think we need to see a mass solution, not only exonerating these wrongly accused postmasters, but compensating them as well?
Absolutely. Well, those who've got compensation so far, the average, I believe, is $500,000. So this is going to be a very big bill for the government when it's finally sorted out.
But why the government? Why not Fujitsu?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, if it isn't possible for the government, for Post Office to sue Fujitsu, basically, then we need to have a very long, hard look at how these government contracts are written, because clearly it was the problem with the computer system. The people who made the computer system, which is Fujitsu, ultimately need to be held responsible.
We were talking to Kevan Jones, a Labour MP, telling us that in 2005-06 there was a pilot. Sorry, 1995-96, a pilot which threw up some of these problems, and postmasters were prosecuted even
right
then.
at the beginning. So they had a pilot to see if there were problems. Problems came up, and rather than solve the problems
they
with the
just
computer
ploughed on
system,
with it.
They blamed the postmasters and mistresses. So it was. I mean, it is absolutely outrageous. What I think, though, is just to say with Kevin and as you're saying, work cross-party. There are people who it shows that good MPs who keep going and don't let go of an issue, but cross-party really do us proud. So you know, good
as opposed to Ed Davey, who just didn't bother.
He didn't bother asking any questions.
Didn't bother. Yeah, just couldn't be bothered because he's a small folk and they don't matter.
Small
I think
folk.
we need a mass sort of clearing of these wrongful convictions, because it's very, very clear that, you know, they're unsafe and extremely distressing for those small folk, as I say.
And Emma, they had to go through such hoops to become a postmistress. It's not easy.
Not
you get
easy.
all sorts of tests about your honesty and integrity.
Yeah, and they just weren't deemed important enough for anyone to listen to them saying something is very wrong here.
And it didn't occur to Ed Davey, who's apparently meant to be very clever, that 735 people being prosecuted all at the same time for the same offence, there could possibly be a problem with the equipment.
Completely out of line with everything that happened previously. I mean, it just makes me think that we need more journalists in Parliament, because at least journalists ask a lot of questions.
We do.
You know.
Well, Michael Gove has been an outstanding success as a journalist in Parliament, hasn't he, Matthew?
Well, I think, Michael, I think, is one of the better members of the Cabinet. I would say that. You know, I'm not... I'll give credit where it's due. And I think that's partly because the whole thing about being an MP, you should just be asking questions and challenging power. That's what you're there for.
Yeah.
You're there to
pushing back at the civil service who want a quiet life.
But also across detail. I think you need to be a details person. Of course, you need to be broad brush if you're going to be the Prime Minister or whatever, but it was always that lack of detail, attention to detail that brought down Boris Johnson, really.
Sure it was,
He was never really...
And what do you think of Paula Vennell's role in all of this? Should she be stripped of her CBE? Should she hand it back herself, perhaps?
If only people had some integrity, if only they had the courage to say, do you know what, I have discredited this system. But, I mean, for many of us, I think we feel that the honours system is completely discredited.
Really is.
Yet again. I mean, you have Baroness Mohn, you have Vennells. I mean, how many more of these
She got this in 2019 when hundreds of people had been prosecuted. Some had gone to prison, some had already taken their own lives. And she got it for services to the post office.
Yes, it's not even like it was... I mean, sometimes they're dressed up as charitable
services.
Absolutely. So, I mean, there's an online poll today in one of the papers, and I'm amazed that 3% of people have voted that she should keep it. Do you know she's an ordained...
She's obviously got a large family.
Exactly. She's an ordained Church of England minister, and the church... She had to resign from the church.
I know.
So, because the church said, no thanks.
Yeah.
So, I think, you know, she has some moral compass, and she should hand it back, totally.
Yeah.
Now, Matthew, I want to stay with you because you were a very, very close friend with Derek Draper, who so very sadly passed away.
Absolutely. And I think over the weekend, it's just announced on Friday, and over the weekend it's really hit in. There was an amazing piece in the Sunday Times by Decca Aikenhead, who'd known Derek since, which I'm afraid I could, you know, burst into tears while reading it, because it gave the real portrait of Derek, which was, he was a character, to put it mildly. He was no saint, but he was an absolutely incredible force of nature. And this morning, Kate Garraway has done a video message, which Good Morning Britain have played, just thanking the absolutely inundated with support, has been overwhelmed. And I know that's meant an awful lot to Kate as she sorts, you know, starts to pick up the pieces this weekend. I mean, I was speaking to Gloria Di Piero, who of GB News, who brought them together, who introduced them.
She did.
I didn't know that.
Absolutely.
Gloria was a Labour MP, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. And Gloria has been with Kate and sorting out the practicals this weekend. And I know that those messages of support have just mean so much to Kate.
When you said, tell us a bit more about him, because I was on Good Morning Britain today and I said, look, when he was working with Peter Mandelson, who was an architect of New Labour, I was on the Times, I was a very young, thrusting, ambitious...
I think that might be the first time I met you, Andrew.
Probably.
Yes.
And I said, it's fair to say I had some run-ins with Derek Draper. It's fair to say they didn't always end amicably, but whatever you say about it, he was tough, clever, and very, very clever. But by God, he knew it.
Yeah, I mean, he did know it. He became the George Best, as I like to describe, the George Best of New Labour. It slightly went to his head in those heady days of '97, which is when he got himself into trouble. But before that, when I first met Derek, it was when John Smith was still the leader of the party. I remember being taken along the corridor when he worked for Peter Mandelson, introduced to Gordon Brown for the first time I was 18, and Gordon Brown went, oh, any friend of Derek's is a friend of mine. Yeah. I'm not sure he said that 6 months later when the leadership battle happened, with the leadership discussions between the two of them about which one would stand between Tony and Gordon. But the thing about Derek is that he really was central to the New Labour project because he rooted people like Tony, who's obviously is quite a posh boy, in a kind of working class Labour project. Derek joined the Young Socialists when he was 15, you know, and was absolutely rooted in Lancashire and was absolutely rooted in the detail of the Labour Party, and that's what he brought. I mean, I remember we wrote the clause for a campaign to get rid of Clause 4 in Derek's flat.
This was the thing, committing Labour to
nationalisation, which Tony got rid of, and how do we actually get it through the party? That's what Derek was crucial at. So just one thing I noticed, which is in the obituaries, is, I mean, some of them said, you know, Kate Garraway's husband, you know, has died, and he was many things, and that he was very proud of being Kate Garraway's husband, but I think you wouldn't have that with a woman now. You wouldn't say they were just somebody's wife.
He was somebody in his own right.
Absolutely. So I thought the best one summed him up as New Labour maverick turned psychotherapist and Kate Garraway's husband, which are the three pillars of his life.
Oh, absolutely.
It's so interesting to hear the other side of it, because I have to admit, I didn't really know much about him until the pandemic, and he became so desperately ill, and then he was... For some reason, Kate and Derek were in the Daily Mail pretty much every day with the latest update on his illness and all of that. They seem to take on that cause, but it's so interesting to hear about that in the heady days, as you say, the heady days of the New Labour project.
Oh, he was huge, and Peter Mandelson. He was Peter Mandelson's right arm.
Bit of a playboy, and
absolutely.
All of that stuff.
And he became a playboy. I mean, he was this kind of working class. I remember when I first met Derek, he wouldn't have a travel card which included the tube because it was too expensive. He'd only have a bus pass because he kept his working class roots.
How times changed him.
And then he ended up, if you look online, there's these clips of him in the open-top Mercedes driving around Westminster in 97, 98. I mean, you know, some of the anecdotes I wouldn't say on television, but, you know, he really was a force of nature. And I'm glad that as you say, I think that the COVID recovery, I mean, obviously, dealing with COVID meant so much to people because he was probably the most high-profile person in those very early days, and people, as you say, followed his progress. But I'm glad that his role in creating New Labour's been remembered too.
Yeah, and of course our thoughts are with Kate Garraway and the entire
I sent a
family.
text this morning saying we're all thinking about it.
Oh, that's really lovely. Emma, let's go over to you now, shall we? And this is Joey Barton.
Horrible man.
Yes, a rant on Twitter, let's say, has claimed some women in football have slept their way to the top.
Well, this has been rumbling on now for a few days.
Just for news, he was a footballer who then became a football manager.
Footballer who became a football manager and has recently, well, in the last few days, has been launched this sort of bizarre tirade against women in football in general, but women commentators. It's now morphed into this very, very weird thing. This morning, he's been ranting about his great-grandfather being in the... being gassed in the First World War in Ypres in 1915. And the latest on Twitter, he says... He thinks he's a freedom fighter for everything, in general, basically. He says, I'm a week into the new year, and I've got all of you, the woke, the race hustlers, the gender hustlers, the COVID hustlers, on effing toast. You are all effing imbeciles. Oh. He's talking about women sleeping their way to the top. He's talking about female pundits not up to the job. He seems to be just sort of spray gun. This weird,
I think there's something wrong, isn't there? Because, I mean, quoting saying, I'm doing this for my grandfather. I mean, I don't think your grandfather died at Ypres for, so that you could criticise female football commentators. I mean, it's pretty offensive to those who did die.
He's taken on the whole world.
And his point about women, he doesn't think women are capable of being as good as men as commentating on football because it's it used to be a predominantly male sport.
But I think there's a place for a discussion about women and whether women in high-profile positions in sport have to look great. You know, I think there are lots of things to explore there. But the way that Joey Barton has done this, and to attack specific commentators, Anu Aluko and Lucy Ward, he's been comparing them to serial killers.
What?
What? I know. I mean, I really struggle to make sense of what he's actually on about.
To compare to Rose West?
Yes.
He compared Rose West.
He caused a storm over the weekend after he compared two pundits, Eni Aluko and Lucy Ward, to serial killers Fred and Rose West. This was on Friday.
To be charitable, perhaps he'd been drinking, but even if you've been drinking, how could you possibly make that comparison?
Yeah, and if you've been drinking, don't tweet. That's
always been my rule.
It doesn't even make sense, does it?
It's difficult to know what he's trying to achieve.
What he's trying to achieve
from
this.
this.
Well, the reason I read out that tweet is because I think he's getting the fuel from all the rage, and he now feels that he's saving the country. I mean, that's what he's saying.
I mean, he's even suggested that this could end up in court. I mean, if he's saying, I'm reading all of these defamatory tweets about me, this is what he's tweeting yesterday.
Well, I think it will end up in court if he carries on comparing people.
He says, I've got but he's saying, I've got deep pockets, bring it on.
But also to suggest that with no evidence whatsoever that some of these women who've got these big jobs in football have slept their way to the top.
It's hugely offensive, isn't it?
It's really.
It's like something from the mid-70s. And I thought these attitudes had died, and clearly they haven't. I mean, Joey Barton's the living continuation of what we thought male chauvinism. We thought we'd gone, at least in public.
Well, he says he's got plenty to fight back with in this latest rant, and he's also said he's got deep pockets, so he would be willing to...
Who did he play for, by the way? I don't know.
So our wonderful producer Dean has filled me in. It was Man City, QPR, Marseille, back to QPR.
Yeah, most recently, apparently...
Making me look like I know about football.
The manager of League One side Bristol Rovers.
Wow. So it's not as if you played for the Manchester United or...
No, and apparently you played for England once. If Dean is, if I've got my briefing right, play for but just the once.
Yeah, I think he's more high profile than a great, you know.
Yeah,
seen as
he's more high profile. It's what Tony Banks once said of a Tory MP: a gob on a stick.
He's absolutely gob on a stick.
Absolutely,
but of course,
gob on a stick.
He's also done himself out of a job because nobody's going to employ him now because you couldn't put him on television because you never know what he's going to say. No. Could you imagine saying some of these things he's been tweeting on TV? Then trouble would be had.
Yeah, absolutely bizarre, isn't it? Emma Wolfe and Matthew Lars are really good to see this morning. Always a joy.
Lovely insights into Draper.
That was really lovely insight. Thank you very much. I'm very sorry for your loss as well, because you were very close friends, weren't you, since you were 18 years old, I believe.
Yeah. I had hair then, hair and hope. I've still got some hope.
You lost your hair because you were with Labour for so long.
Oh, Andrew, cruel.
Well, thank you for having me, Andrew.
This is it
from Britain's Newsroom. I'm sure I will. Thank you. Up next is Good Afternoon Britain with Tom and Dawn.
See you tomorrow.
A crucial afternoon in the post office scandal. Could mass exonerations take place after a crucial meeting with the Justice Minister this afternoon?
And it's going to get very, very cold. The floods were nothing. It is going to be -5, and that's in the centre of London.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. A cold start to a cold week. Most of us will be dry through this week, but today we do have a few showers around. High pressure is controlling our weather, as it will do for the next several days. And around the high pressure, the winds go clockwise. I mean, we've got this easterly breeze across the south, and that is bringing a mixture of rain, sleet and snow showers over parts of East Anglia and the southeast. Increasingly, a few flurries likely in and around London, Essex, Kent, but also perhaps into parts of Hampshire, the Sussexes, and maybe one or two even in the South Midlands. The odd rain and sleet shower over northern England, southern Scotland, but for most it's dry. Quite cloudy, but where we've got some sunshine, well, it still feels cold because temperatures are struggling below average, and that wind making it feel even colder in the south, blowing a few more of those wintry showers across parts of the southwest, perhaps for a time through the evening and overnight, maybe into parts of South Wales. So again, you might see a few flurries here and there. Could turn icy as well, where we've got those showers as temperatures tumble. Again, widely well below freezing, particularly in Scotland, where there's some freezing fog patches which are likely to linger through the day, through the night and into tomorrow morning. Again, most places having a fine, bright day tomorrow. Any early showers in the southwest, they will disappear. If anything, not as much cloud around tomorrow, so a better chance of seeing longer spells of sunshine, but it ain't going to warm things up very much. Another cold one tomorrow.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to